Hi, and welcome to another episode of Heart and Health Wellness. I'm your host, Dr. Melissa Welch, and I'm so glad that you are here today. If you are new to the show, I just want to say welcome. This is a place where we talk all about your biopsychosocial spiritual wellness, which is just a mouthful way of saying that we care about your body, your mind, and your spirit, and your relationships too. So today we are going to be talking all about self-care and redefining what self-care means to you. Now that's a buzzword that's been very popular lately. So we're going to take a look at when it became popular, how it's kind of defined today, but how I think it might be more helpful to you with a redefinition. So that's what we're going to do today. As a reminder, if you are working on setting goals for yourself and improving your overall wellness, I have made several daily, weekly, and monthly wellness trackers that are totally free and available to you. If you want to check those out, they are in the link down in the show notes or the description. Whatever your platform you're listening to or watching this on, you can get it through that link. So check those out. We are 3 months into the year already, which is wild and blows my mind. But make sure that you are sticking to those goals that you've set for yourself, redefining them if you need to, and staying on track for those long-term visions that you have for the year. Okay. So with that being said, let's go ahead and dive in. As I mentioned, we're going to be talking about self-care today, but we're actually going to stretch this out for the next several weeks. So today we're going to be talking about it very broadly and in general, and then the next 4 weeks, because there happen to be 5 Tuesdays in the month of April, we're going to break down the biological, psychological, social, and spiritual components of self-care and how it influences each of those domains of your health. Today's going to be very general, but make sure that you stay tuned the next several weeks to hear about how it applies in those unique domains of your overall health and well-being. Self-care is often framed as kind of this luxury thing that you get to do. It's kind of an indulgence that you might be, I don't know, like going to get your nails done or taking care of yourself at the spa for a day. And while that's a nice concept, it's really not very realistic. I don't know a lot of people in my life who are able to do things like that very often, whether it's because they can't afford it or they don't have the time for it, whatever it might be. And I imagine that you probably fall into one of those categories, because if you were getting to do those things all the time, you probably wouldn't be listening to this podcast and trying to improve your wellness. I would think that if someone is able to go to the spa on a weekly basis, they're probably doing really well. Maybe that's just a bias that I have, or an assumption that I have, but I don't know. I'm taking a guess there. So the idea is that self-care really doesn't need to be these big luxurious moments, these events that happen randomly or spontaneously, but actually it needs to be something that is sustainable, that you can count on doing on a regular routine basis. So you have some kind of balance, and I'm careful with the word balance because I don't know that anybody ever really achieves true balance, but this idea of making sure that you're checking in with yourself and taking care of yourself on a regular basis so that you're not getting totally overwhelmed and you can take care of your long-term well-being. So we're going to talk about the biopsychosocial spiritual components because, like everything with this show, we need to understand how all 4 domains are important and play a part in your overall well-being. However, today I really just want you to focus on thinking about what self-care has meant to you in the past, and then really pushing yourself to challenge that definition and allow yourself to be more open to the concept of it being something different than what you are used to when you think about self-care. So I want you to ask yourself real quick, was there a time when you thought self-care was unnecessary or something that you had to earn? I think for myself, when I'm thinking back to when I was in graduate school and especially during my doctoral program, I felt like there was so much pressure to be working constantly, and I didn't have a great way of routinely mixing in or weaving in self-care. And I think a lot of times that left me feeling just totally exhausted and depleted. And I felt like in order to be able to relax and go to the beach for the weekend, or to be able to go spend some time at the park or something like that, I had to first accomplish a task, whether that be working on a paper or a homework assignment or something like that. And so it always felt like it was something that I pushed off until later as a reward for completing that task, or as something that was extra that I got to do because I finally had time to do it. And unfortunately, by looking at it that way, it really prevented me from getting to enjoy the benefits of doing regular self-care. And so now I am trying to be more mindful of making myself do those self-care practices on a routine basis and making the time for it rather than waiting for that time to show up. I hope that makes sense, and we'll talk more about that toward the end of today. First of all, let's kind of dive into the evolution of this concept of self-care and when it actually emerged. So self-care has roots in both medical and mental health areas. It also is talked about a lot in activist communities. So I want to talk about each of those different areas and why it became such a popular concept or thing that we needed to be paying attention to from the beginning. So with the medical origins, it was originally referred to ways that patients could care for themselves outside from formal healthcare settings. So in formal healthcare settings, there was a lot of taking care of their biological needs, but they wanted to encourage people to continue doing that outside of the healthcare setting. For example, if they're in the hospital, you're making sure that you're getting all the right nutrients, all the right hydration, cleaning your wounds like you needed to, whatever that might be. And they wanted to prepare patients to be able to go home and continue to do those things on a regular basis so that their wounds would heal or their conditions would improve. And so it was this idea of you can take care of yourself, and you need to be able to do that when you aren't with a professional or you aren't in a healthcare setting. For the mental health connection, we really focused on gaining traction with self-care in the 80s and the 90s, especially within that growth of psychology and wellness circles where they talked about, at the time, mental health was growing in popularity, being able to talk about it. It's okay to not be okay kind of thing. We need to talk about depression. We need to talk about anxiety. And in order to prevent those things from being really intense issues that you were dealing with, you needed to be able to take care of yourself on a regular basis to prevent those issues from either arising in the first place or from becoming too severe or helping decrease them. I hope that makes sense. So the mental health capacity, I think, is where I tend to go to, and that's probably because of my training, just my own personal experiences and the work that I do as a therapist. But it was this idea of we can take care of these mental health conditions if we teach people to take care of themselves and not get too stressed and too burned out. And then in the activism and burnout prevention area, civil rights and feminist movements really emphasize the importance of self-care as a way to sustain that long-term work without burning out. So there was a lot of traction of people like really pushing against some of these larger systems and saying, you know, we need change to happen, which was fabulous, but that is really hard work and it's a very slow process. And so if people weren't taking care of themselves, they were quickly burning out and feeling this is too much. I can't do it. We're just going to give up. It's never going to change kind of thing. And so these groups were really pushing people to think about taking care of themselves, taking breaks when they needed to, only doing so much that they could handle, and then making sure that they had a quote unquote balance in order to be able to continue those movements even when it was really hard and slow progress. So that just helps you have an understanding of kind of why self-care originally got started as a hot topic or a buzzword. And then with the rise of social media and the way that we share information with each other, and there's this overabundance of information now, that wellness industry really made self-care mainstream. And we've seen that happen more just in the last several years, especially. So some of the ways that they did that, though, I want to point out, was through commercialization and really distorting it to be something that was a way for them to make money off of it. And so this like special, unique thing that you could do, or you go take a day at the spa and make sure you're taking care of yourself. And it really distanced it from the concept of allowing yourself to continue to be well in the long run and doing things on a routine basis to take care of yourself, and became more of this like fancy thing that you should be doing to treat yourself. And I think that's really where we lost the essence of what self-care should be. So I would encourage you to kind of think about, where do I see self-care popping up on my newsfeed? What kind of ads are promoting self-care? And why might presenting the idea of self-care benefit those companies? And I'm not saying those companies are bad for doing that, but maybe there's more to self-care than just doing something that you're going to have to spend a bunch of money on. So I want to also talk today about ways that you can be taking care of yourself without having to spend a lot of money on that. So how much are people actually talking about self-care? Well, I hear about it all the time, being in the mental health field and doing therapy. I think people feel like they need to talk about that in therapy. So I hear about it a lot, but it is definitely a buzzword on social media. I would have a hard time believing that there's anybody out there at this point who hasn't heard self-care. It's often tied to those luxury products or kind of pampering events and lifestyles that I mentioned with the social media stuff. But Google has found that the searches for self-care have grown, especially after 2020. And that was a time that could relate to that social justice piece, right? There's a lot of that going on in 2020. And there was also this really challenging pandemic going on where people were stuck at home, work was stressful, people were losing jobs, there was isolation. So there was just a lot of struggle happening emotionally that led to this increased discussion of self-care and what that looked like. There was also a lot of opportunity for people to be home and engage in self-care practices or activities that maybe they didn't find time for in the past. So for example, I know for myself during the pandemic, I was one of the many people who got involved in making sourdough. And so I started a sourdough starter and had a lot of fun baking bread. And for me, I was still in grad school. That was my final year of grad school. I do not recommend going through a pandemic in your final year of your doctoral program if you can plan ahead for that. But so getting into bread making was one of the ways that I could just slow down, be very focused on what I was doing with my hands, having fun, making something, finding artistry in it, but also like a very distinct process and feeling accomplished at the end of it. So that was a fun way for me to do self-care. And I think that was very popular in 2020 of people getting into activities like that. So it definitely increased during that pandemic period. But also in the workplace, you may have noticed that your employer might be focusing more on self-care discussions and wanting to provide opportunities for you to take care of yourself through employee assistance programs or wellness initiatives. I know my employer sometimes does wellness initiatives where they encourage people to do challenges like walking or eating well classes or things like that. And sometimes those wellness initiatives have really good intentions, but they're not always applied in a meaningful way or in a way that helps the person transition into making that a sustainable part of their life going forward. So it's fun for the challenge, but it's not necessarily something that's going to stick with them over the long term. And so it's a nice idea, but it doesn't really have that full effect that they hope it will. But it's nice that the organizations are paying more attention to it. I think there's a lot of pressure to do that, especially now that all these people have gone home for work and now they want them to come back to the workplace. You know, there's pressure to make the workplace a better place to be. And so these wellness initiatives are a way to do that, but also encouraging it as a way to be engaging in self-care when you're not at work and finding balance like that. Anyways, I'll get off that soapbox, but I think, you know, that's a place where we hear it a lot, but maybe it's not done as effectively as it could be. So there's this gap that we're seeing between what's being talked about with self-care and then what's actually being put into practice in your life. And I'm sure you can think about that in your own life, where you think about how self-care is something that you see on the news feed or hear people talking about it. You know what it is in theory, but you're not actually applying that to your life on a regular basis. And so you're going, well, this concept of self-care is nice, but what does that actually look like for me? And how can I make that part of my life so that I'm not feeling burnt out and exhausted? And so that's what I want to really help you challenge, is that concept to say, maybe there's something more to this that we need to be thinking about, or maybe there's a way that I can approach it that's going to be more applicable to life. So what are most people doing for self-care? And I'm kind of smiling if if you're not watching the video and you're just listening, just know I'm kind of like smiling to myself, because anytime we're asking what most people do for self-care, I'm thinking about what people are actually reporting that they're doing for self-care. And I wonder if they're actually doing that because we want to do things, but what are we actually doing? So I think that's a good thing to be challenging yourself on too. Don't just say you're going to do it. What are you actually going to do? But from surveys and research that is out there, we find that some of the common self-care activities include relaxation-based activities. So taking bubble baths, having spa days, watching TV. I know I personally love a good bubble bath, but the frequency of that is probably once every 2 to 3 months. It just is not something that I get to incorporate very often. Spa days definitely don't happen for me. Watching TV does, but it definitely looks different now that I have a toddler, because when do I have time to actually sit and watch the storyline of something? So now when I'm watching my TV, it's usually junk TV where I don't have to actually follow the storyline or it's, Elmo or Sesame Street or Miss Rachel, which doesn't have the same effect. So some other options are productivity-based activities. This could include cleaning, organizing, or planning. Now, I will say this is something that I've been able to incorporate more. Every now and then I have a morning to myself where the baby is able to be at daycare and I can work from home. I have some flexibility with that, which is really, really nice. And for me, getting to clean and organize and pick up around my home helps me feel really good. Getting rid of that clutter feels so good. I know just the other day, I packed up a bunch of stuff from my closet that I no longer either fit into or wear anymore. And so it's just taking up space, and decluttering that feels really good. Getting things up off the floor and put away, whatever. So that one is a big one for me. And I think, again, as I'm challenging my own thoughts about what self-care activities are and how often I do them, that one is really helpful to me, but I should probably be doing it on a more consistent routine basis. So I'm doing this with you. I'm challenging myself with you. There's also connection-based activities. So spending time with loved ones, doing therapy or journaling. And I think all of those are really good. I know I encourage journaling a lot, especially on this podcast. I talk about it a lot. And that's something that I try to do on an at least weekly basis. Doing it daily has just not been something that I've been able to accomplish, but I try to do it on at least a weekly basis. For therapy, I do have a personal therapist. Side note, if you ever see a therapist who's not done their own therapy, red flag. I think a wonderful therapist should be open to therapy and have their own therapist that they can get in touch with. And I personally have one that I talk to not every single month, but every now and then when I need to. And I do that virtually, which is really nice. And that's a whole nother conversation. But therapy is a good way to be taking care of yourself, checking in or having that resource available to you when you need it. I'm trying not to go off on a tangent too much, but I will just say it's okay if you have a therapist and you're not going every single week. It's okay if you just have someone that you can call on when you need to, kind of like going to the dentist or the eye doctor. Side note, I'll leave it at that. Okay. And then time with loved ones is definitely a big one for me that I wish I incorporated more. I think I've mentioned in the past, I try to do that at least a couple times a week. And so whether that's getting to spend time with family when they come into town or when I'm traveling, or just getting coffee with a girlfriend, whatever it might be, I always feel much more rejuvenated after that. And it's really important for me to make that a priority. And I think it's probably a good one for you to do too. Sometimes we get so busy in that hustle and bustle, it's hard to make time for that. But spending time with loved ones is definitely a good one. And then we have our health-based activities. So things like exercise, eating well and sleep hygiene. So when we're talking about exercise, sometimes I like to use the word physical activity instead of exercise, because I think we have a lot of ideas of what exercise is and maybe don't like that. But really what it comes down to is moving your body on a consistent basis. So whether that's just going for a walk or doing some stretching or doing a yoga in your living room, watching a YouTube video about it, whatever it might be, just moving your body is really important. And even if that's just getting your steps every day and feeling good about that, can definitely be considered self-care. Eating well, making sure that you're giving yourself nutritious foods that are feeding your brain, fueling your energy, all of that is really important. Sometimes I joke that having something sweet like ice cream or desserts, I'm just a sucker for anything baked goods. And I have a really hard time saying no to something baked goods if it's in front of me. Sometimes I joke that that is self-care, but honestly, those foods, while you're enjoying them in the moment, are really not doing anything for your body. So just keep that in mind, that you have to find some kind of balance with that. And then sleep hygiene. I wonder how many people are actually doing this for self-care. Now, I know theoretically we're all trying to get 8 to 10 hours of sleep at night, and I think that's fabulous for the people who are actually making that happen. I would like to talk to those people because it's definitely not happening in my life. But sleep hygiene doesn't just include the number of hours of sleep you get. It also includes things like turning off the TV, having, no distractions around you or noises that are going to be waking you up. So whether it's moving your body, eating well, or sleep hygiene, those are some of the health-based activities that people are doing. This is again from what the surveys say. I just wonder how many people are actually implementing this. So the problem is that many people are treating these activities as something that is occasional rather than something that is a regular necessity in their life. So like I mentioned, when I was in grad school, and even now, but especially when I was in grad school, I would feel like I had to get all of this other stuff done. And then when I had time for self-care, then I would try to plug it in, which wasn't very often because I had so much to do. But if I had made this a priority of making it happen on a regular basis and consistently, then I would have felt better and had more energy to do the homework assignments and the writing and all of that. So it's kind of this tricky chicken or egg thing, but the self-care has to be implemented first in order for you to feel good the rest of the time, instead of it being something that is extra. So why is it important to practice it regularly? Well, without regular self-care, we tend to build up stress. It accumulates in our body. We notice that through tension. We notice that through headaches. We notice it by not being able to sleep well, by feeling just icky or nauseous. Like this stress builds up in our bodies. And whether we're noticing that we're thinking about it or not, our body knows that it is there. And so this leads to things like chronic health issues and emotional exhaustion and experiencing burnout and just being totally done with everything. And so that chronic stress that is always there is going to impact us in lots of different areas. So we don't want to accumulate that stress. I also want to point out that self-care does not need to be something that is just in place for kind of this crisis recovery state. And when there's something really bad, then we go into self-care mode. Like, you don't wait till you're burned out to then implement self-care. It needs to be something that we're using as a preventative measure for our well-being. So I'm going to come back to this. I mentioned the whole having a therapist on call for when you need them, or having a relationship with a therapist that you can call to get in to see when you need to. Because instead of it being something that you have to go to when your life is crumbling, maybe make it something where you check in with your therapist every other month or every 3 months or every 6 months if you're doing really well, to say, hey, I'm just checking in. This is what I'm doing. This is how I'm taking care of myself. Okay, things are great. Continue on. Yesterday, I took my son to the ENT, and it was just a follow-up. Looked at his nose, looked at his ears, looked at his mouth. Everything looks good. You don't have to come back for another year. It can be the same way with our other components of mental health and physical health. The point is, you need to be checking in on yourself regularly, consistently, rather than waiting for things to fall apart and crumble and then try to put it back together. It's a whole lot easier to maintain. I'm going to go with another analogy, full of them today. It's a whole lot easier to maintain a car's health by taking it to the shop when you need to than waiting for it to fall apart and then try to put it back together and repair it. It's also a lot more expensive when you do it that way. So prevention is better than reaction. So self-care is the same thing with that. I put in here, I want to talk about making self-care less woo-woo and more tangible. Self-care does not have to be expensive. It does not have to be complicated. And it does not have to be this like spiritual journey if that's not your thing. Now, if that's your thing, go for it. But it doesn't have to be like that. It doesn't have to be this escape to a 3-day weekend retreat or a spa. Those are fabulous, but those aren't realistic for doing on a regular basis. So it doesn't have to be like that. Here's 2 ways of making self-care more practical and reframing it in your mind. Instead of thinking self-care is a luxury, I want you to think self-care is maintenance. Instead of it being something that you get to do, it's something that I'm going to do. Instead of I'll do self-care when I have time, I'm going to build self-care into my routine, just like I eat and sleep every day. Self-care is not special and unique. That happens every now and then. It needs to be something that is normal part of your routine that you're incorporating on a regular basis. And again, I will emphasize when we're talking about making it something that is incorporated into your regular routine, it's because it's not fancy, it's not expensive, it doesn't take a lot of time. It's the difference of saying, I'm going to sit on the couch and binge watch TV for an hour. Instead, I'm going to watch TV and do some stretching on the floor while I do that. So it's that habit stacking concept that we've talked about in the past of taking something you're already doing and adding onto it something that's going to actually help you and help you feel better and allow you to take care of yourself in a preventative way. I hope that makes sense. Am I making sense? Let me know in the comments if this is making sense to you and if you're going to be able to reframe the way that you think about self-care. I want to take a quick moment to tell you about one of the things that I have been doing to incorporate self-care into my normal routine. It has been incorporating a daily greens powder into what I'm consuming every day. So the daily greens powder that I really like is called Optimal Human. To me, it tastes like green tea. I think it's really delicious. It's not like some of the other greens powders that I've tried where I feel like I have to add apple juice or something to make it tasty, lemonade or something like that. This one is really good and I can drink it on its own. If you want to check it out, you can get your first month free with Optimal Human. That link is down in the show notes. Okay, so I want to encourage you to give some reflection this week. What is one self-care practice that you have dismissed because it didn't look like self-care? Like it's something that you wanted to do, but you thought that's not good enough. That doesn't qualify as self-care. I'm not going to worry about that. Because my guess is there's something in the back of your mind that's coming up for you right now. You're like, yeah, that would be a good way to take care of myself. Or yeah, that's something that I could incorporate. What is that thing? And I want to challenge you to find a way to incorporate that at least a few times throughout the week, this week, to make your self-care maybe a little bit better and a little bit more routine part of what you do in your normal day-to-day activities. Okay, next week we're going to start with the biological component of self-care. We're going to look at kind of why your body needs it and why listening to it is an act of self-respect that you should be doing on a regular basis. So stay tuned next week for that. That will be really good. Remember that I have those daily, weekly, and monthly wellness trackers for you. So if you are trying to incorporate some new self-care practices into your routine, that would be a great way of planning it out and making sure that you're tracking it to make it happen. Those are available in the link down in the show notes or the description. Please remember, if you got something from this episode today, share it with somebody maybe who could be your accountability partner in helping you do those self-care activities on a regular basis, or just someone that you think would enjoy listening to this episode. Also, if you found it helpful, please give it a positive review or a thumbs up, 5 stars, whatever it might be. Both of those things are really helpful when it comes to getting the word out about the podcast and helping it grow. I'm so thankful that you are here. Thank you for joining me on Heart and Health Wellness. I hope you have a fabulous rest of your day. And until next time, be well.